Hello and welcome to another video from the English at Penrice YouTube channel. Today we're going to be having a look at the character of Mrs Birling from J.B. Priestley's An Inspector Calls. We're going to be exploring some of the key events that involve this character, as well as some key quotes and some sophisticated vocabulary that you could use to enhance your analysis of her. If you're thinking about your exam, this is going to help you with your English Literature Paper 2 exam, Section A response. Okay, let's start by having a look at some key information in relation to this character then. Priestley crafts her as the archetypal upper-class Edwardian woman. So in his eyes, in the writer's eyes, a person who is absolutely typical of that group of people at the time. We know that she's upper class because we're told that she is her husband's social superior. Therefore, Mr. Birling being upper middle class because he's made his money through his factory. We know that she is superior to that in the class hierarchy. She's above that. So she has married from the upper class into an upper middle class family. At the time, that may well have been frowned upon by her family, but she absolutely does embody some of Priestley's key features of the upper class. She's overly concerned with her status and her reputation, and she's keenly aware of how she thinks she should be treated by other people. Thus, she gets very frustrated by the inspector's treatment of her, and she admits that Eva Smith's approach to her she thought was impertinent, not showing her the desired level of respect. She's also overly concerned with etiquette and manners. She chides her husband for mentioning to tell the cook that dinner was delicious. She speaks disdainfully about something that Sheila says, saying, oh, the things you girls pick up these days. She's very, very aware of how people perceive her and her status and her standing in society. Unfortunately, though, she is ignorant to her own children and their needs and their own suffering. She is completely unaware of Eric's alcoholism, despite the audience becoming quite aware of it as the play goes on. And she's also very reluctant, we feel, to let Sheila become more independent and open her view on the world and society around her. Her relationship with Eva is the last in the chain of events that lead to Eva Smith's devastating suicide. Eva Smith appeals to Mrs Birling's charity, the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation, and she is turned away from it, despite being pregnant, with no job, no family, nobody to appeal to for financial help. After rejecting stolen money, she is callously turned away and not given any financial or emotional support. So despite being aware of this desperate situation that Eva was in, Mrs Birling is prejudiced against her case from the outset, and she is ultimately the one to lead Eva to think that she has no other option than to take her own life. She fails to be open and honest with the inspector, especially at the start of her interrogation. She is unable to appreciate that she needs to talk about her involvement with Eva Smith, and certainly unable to accept any responsibility that her actions were immoral in any way. She's very reticent and unable, unlike Sheila, to be candid with the inspector about her dealings with Eva Smith. And following on from that, she is then unable to learn from her mistakes. At the end of the play, she does not change her perception of her own actions. She still appears to believe that she and her husband are blameless, and she certainly does not change her perception of how society should be working more widely, again rejecting a socialist outlook and maintaining that capitalist perspective that her and her husband share. So why did Priestley craft this character in the way that he did? He uses Mrs Birling to represent a stubborn, snobbish, narrow-minded perception of the affluent classes in pre-war England, a time that Priestley did not want to return to as a society, and a time that he thought maintained inequality and a lack of collective responsibility in society. She represents the rich people who, in Priestley's eyes in society, very frequently failed to accept that they needed to support those more vulnerable than them, and often acted in a way that was very thoughtless and led to dreadful consequences. Okay then, some key quotes for this character. As mentioned previously, in the stage directions, we are told that she is her husband's social superior. So we know that she has married from the upper class into the upper middle class. She's also described as a rather cold woman, which suggests that she's rather aloof. She's not very warm and welcoming and friendly as a character, and that maybe links to her upper class upbringing, so a lack of emotion there. The way she describes Eva Smith in the second quote is really, really telling. She says, "girls of that class." And this quote appears just after the inspector is pondering why Eva Smith might have taken her own life. So Mrs Birling's response is to suggest that there is no way that she can appreciate why a girl of the working class would have carried out such an action. She distances herself from the working class, almost as if the way the working class women thought and acted was completely different to the way she acted and thought, and she couldn't understand what they were going through. She shows very, very little empathy there, and also it's quite a derogatory way of speaking about Eva, almost as if she's quite disdainful of the working class and sees herself as superior to them. Then she mentions how Eva Smith approaches her case at the charity, and she, unfortunately, tells Mrs Birling that her name is Mrs Birling, probably just thinking about Eric, probably thinking that she's got more of a chance of financial help if Mrs Birling thinks that she's married, but unfortunately not being aware that Mrs Birling is the same name that she has chosen. And Mrs Birling says that that was simply a piece of gross impertinence. To act impertinently means to not show the desired level of respect to somebody. And it's an idea that Sheila laughs at in the play, this idea that some people in society, because of their class, should be given more respect than others. But it's an idea that Mrs Birling passionately believes in. And she says because of Eva's impertinence, she was prejudiced against her. So she discriminated against her, and she openly admits that. Then she asserts very bluntly, "I did nothing I'm ashamed of." So she's very, very coldly unable to empathise with Eva Smith and to appreciate that she had any part to play in her suicide. Then the penultimate quote there, we have an excellent metaphor used by the inspector to describe how Eva was rejected from Mrs Birling's charity. And the inspector says that you slammed the door in her face. That's quite a violent, aggressive verb to slam something. It's very final. It's very aggressive. And unfortunately, that was the last in the chain of events before Eva Smith taking her own life. And then finally, a quote that shows the divide between the older generation and the younger generation at the end of the play, and Mr. and Mrs Birling's inability to see a socialist way of life for the future. And she says, "From the way you children talk," referring to Eric and Sheila, sorry, "you might be wanting to help him," referring to the inspector, "instead of us." And there's that real divide between the inspector and the older generation of the Birlings at that point, almost as if they're pitted against each other in some sort of battle. And Mrs Birling wants to win the victory over the inspector and is unable to see why her children have changed. It also shows that she is completely unable to learn a moral lesson from the inspector. instead seeing him as a rival rather than a teacher or a didactic character trying to teach her a moral lesson. Okay, and finally, let's have a look at some sophisticated vocabulary that we might be able to use to enhance our analysis of this character. She's very aloof, so she's not emotionally warm or open or friendly. Rather, she is rather distant and cold, and we're told that at the very outset in the stage directions. Mrs Birling is very condescending. So the way she acts and speaks positions herself as more superior than other people. So she looks down at people and is very aware of her perceived place on the class hierarchy. She's ignorant, so as we've mentioned, she's ignorant to the needs of her own children, as well as Eva Smith and the working class more widely. She can also be seen as very indifferent, so she doesn't care about Eva Smith's suicide particularly, and especially her own involvement in it. The way she treats Eva Smith can be seen as quite callous, so very, very cruel. She's very self-important and egotistical, so she's got a very, very inflated sense of her own importance and significance in society, and she feels that she should be treated with the utmost respect because of that. The next two words are synonyms, so she's very conceited and proud. She's very vain. She has an inflated sense of pride in her actions and her worth. She's very self-confident. So despite being faced with what should appear to be a police inspector, she's unable or unwilling to admit her actions straight away, and she is very forthright in telling the inspector exactly what she thinks. We can describe her as a conservative with a capital C, so very right-wing, capitalist, unable to appreciate perhaps the needs of the working class and the need as a society to move towards a more socialist approach. And then finally, we can use this word remorseless. So she shows no remorse, no sense of sympathy, and certainly no appreciation of her own responsibility. She's not sorry for her actions. She shows no remorse for them. Okay, so that was an exploration of the character of Mrs Birling from Anne in Spectacles by J.B. Priestley. Please sign up to the English at Penrice YouTube channel for more videos that will help support your revision for English literature and language.